The haunted hospital. How would you react if someone you knew had died the day before appeared before your very eyes the next day? Well, that's reportedly what happened in Buenos Aires, Argentina, late 2022, at the Finicieto Sanatorium Hospital, when something very eerie indeed was captured on CCTV footage, which we're about to show. The footage shows a security guard at the hospital leaving his chair to let someone in. Only, it seems that he's the only one who can see them. He guides the seemingly invisible patient through to the waiting area before briefly chatting with them and offering them a wheelchair. They appear to decline his offer and walk through to the doctor's office themselves. The patient that he reportedly dealt with was an elderly woman. Take a look. The security guard himself raised his concerns to the doctors when he did not see the woman leave the hospital hours later into his shift. When he went to check on her to see if there was a medical concern, the doctors reported that there was nobody there that matched her description. The security guard gave the doctors her name, and they informed the guard that there is no way it could have been her. Records show that somebody with her name, fitting her description, passed away just the night before. Staff at the hospital have accused the security guard of playing a prank on them, but why would he go through the process of letting the patient into the hospital and talking to himself if this was the case? This story is currently under investigation, but it truly is a strange one. What do you think really happened, and what do you make of that footage? Take a look at it one more time. Who was writing these letters? This is a terrifying tale of terrorism and threat that comes from the town of Circleville in Ohio. Before the year of 1976, it was a quiet, mostly sleepy town that took pride in its annual pumpkin festival and pleasant countryside atmosphere. That was until a letter arrived addressed to Mary Gillespie, a local school bus driver. In block capitals and simply signed off as the Circleville writer at the bottom, the anonymous note accused Mary, a married woman, of having an affair with Gordon Macy, a married man, who worked as the school superintendent. Understandably, Mary was unsettled by this. She denied the sender's claims and kept the note secret from her husband, but more letters arrived at the family home, this time for her husband Ron. The Circleville writer sent Ron the details of Mary's supposed affair, but he didn't believe them. This prompted the mystery writer to send a more threatening note to Ron, which read, "Gillespie, you've had 2 weeks and done nothing. You are a pig. Make her admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CB, posters, signs, billboards, until the truth comes out. Only pigs ride motorcycles. Good hunting in your red and white truck on your way to work. I followed him for weeks since last summer, and have seen her meet with him several times." The writer then sent further letters to the school board, complete with Mary's bus driver number, encouraging the board to remove Mary's child from the school. Gordon Macy, the man Mary was supposed to be having an affair with, also continued to receive letters. The writer threatened to cut his tires and brakes if he did not stop seeing Mary. These soon escalated to death threats addressed to Mary and Ron's 12-year-old daughter, claiming that Gordon was abusing her. At this point, the couple became terrified. They took the letters to the police, who wiretapped their phones and kept a close eye on their properties in case of any illegal activity. They caught no one. At this point, the writer had begun to target other residents of Circleville. Alarmingly, many of these letters had been written with a pen tipped with poison. The Gillespies, disappointed with the fact the police had not managed to catch the writer, turned to their family for help. Karen and Paul Freshour, Ron's sister and brother-in-law. Remarkably, the fresh hours immediately came up with a suspect name, another local school bus driver by the name of David Longberry, who worked with Mary. The supposed motive was that David was bitter about being rejected romantically by Mary on numerous occasions and wanted to scare her. When the fresh hours wrote to him saying they knew what he was doing and demanding him to stop, the letters did in fact stop, for a while. Soon, the writer had started setting up signs along Mary's bus route, threatening her and implicating her in the affair. The death threats and serious accusations of abuse by Gordon's hands were still present. While Ron worked to dismantle the signs as they popped up, Mary travelled to Florida to visit her sister in order to get away from it all. This left Ron on his own. While on the evening of 19th of August 1977, Ron received a phone call from a man he was sure was the Circleville writer. Furious, he left the house in his truck, taking a gun with him. Less than an hour later, and just at the end of the road, Ron's corpse was found amidst the wreckage of his truck. In the police investigation, it was discovered that he had fired a shot from his gun, but the bullet was nowhere to be found. He was also found to be twice over the legal alcohol limit, despite having only rarely touched alcohol. Unsurprisingly, the family suspected foul play, and the sheriff agreed. Rigorous investigations went ahead to try and prove this, but they could not find anything. If the Circleville writer was responsible for the death, they had left no trace. The death was ultimately declared an accident, but even Ron's death did not stop the letters, however. Many residents of the town came under fire from the threats, and remarkably, some of them proved to be true. Ray Carroll, the town coroner, was accused in 1977 of being a serial abuser by the Circleville writer. 10 years later, he was convicted of this crime. Even Mary would eventually go on to confess to the affair she was first accused of, although she insisted that it only took place after Ron had been pronounced dead. This still was not enough to stop the writer. On February 7, 1983, Mary encountered a sign set up by the side of the road which displayed in graphic detail the abuse that was said to have taken place between Gordon and Mary's 12-year-old daughter. When she stopped the bus to take the sign down, she noticed something alarming: a string connecting the sign to a small box by the side of the road. She left the sign where it was and investigated the box. Within it was a gun, primed to fire at Mary as soon as she took down the sign. The gun's serial number was traced to Wesley, an employee of a local brewery. He reportedly sold the gun to his supervisor and had nothing to do with it for several months. His supervisor, amazingly, was Paul Freshour, Ron's brother-in-law, who was supposed to be helping Mary solve the crime. Paul was immediately arrested but maintained his innocence, claiming he was framed. The officers asked Ron to replicate the handwriting in the letters, and it was a perfect match. This evidence was presented against Paul in his trial, which he seemed to be losing fast. However, another man was supposedly sighted at the site of the gun trap around 20 minutes before it was discovered. This man did not match Paul's description. Despite this, Paul was eventually sentenced to 7 to 25 years behind bars. With Paul in jail, that was presumably the end of the story. Well, no. Strangely, the letters continued to emerge. Paul was put under constant watch at the jail, and the police determined that they were not coming from him. Paul himself even received some. He ultimately served his time and was released in 1994, although there is still serious doubt that he was involved. So who was? What do you think happened here? And would you enjoy a more in-depth video on this insane case? If so, let us know in the comments section below. What do you make of this? The terrifying Doris Bither case. This is a scary tale from Culver City, California, from the mid-1970s. It centers around Doris Bither, a woman who lived in the city at the time, who contacted a parapsychologist by the name of Barry Taff in 1974, when she started to experience strange happenings within her home. Barry met with Doris and discovered a dark history shrouded the woman. Abuse, both physical and substance-based, had followed her throughout her life, and she was living with 4 children in a home that was not fit to be lived in. Doris claimed that she was both physically and sexually assaulted by an unknown entity in her home, and she desperately wanted Barry to investigate. Barry Taft visited Doris's home on August 22, 1974, and continued to do so over a period of 10 weeks. Barry opted not to look into the allegations of assault from the entity, but into the presence of the entity itself. He reported that he did find evidence of paranormal activity in the house. Cold zones, terrible smells, the appearance of eerie, dancing lights, and even objects moving on their own were recorded. The only evidence of these records that stand today are photos of these lights. Since the investigation, experts have determined Barry's photos to show mistakes in photo processing, such as problems with focus or exposure. Barry, however, insists that the paranormal activity was to blame for the strange goings-on in Doris's house. Benjamin Radford, however, a skeptical author on the topic of paranormal activity, wrote that Barry's conclusion was an example of confirmation bias based on his beliefs, and the fact that Doris was likely very distressed due to her living situation and history of abuse. It's a sad tale, but one that many believe is rooted in more human terrors than those of the paranormal. Regardless, Doris and Barry remain convinced that the house was haunted, and that Doris's problems were rooted in dark entities that followed her. The disturbing story of Margaret Howe Lovatt. Margaret Howe Lovatt, now in her early 80s, is a former volunteer naturalist. She hails from the US Virgin Island of St. Thomas and began volunteering at a local dolphin research center when she was in her early 20s. Day in, day out, she would turn up to the center and get to know both the dolphins and the scientists researching them. One of these scientists was John C. Lilly, a neuroscientist from California, who, backed by NASA, had big plans to build a research lab with a very irregular goal. He wanted to develop a method of communicating with extraterrestrial life forms, should we encounter them in the galaxy. His goal was to trial his research on some of Earth's most intelligent animals, dolphins. With the help of NASA, he was able to set up a dolphinarium on the island of St. Thomas, and housed 3 bottlenose dolphins, a male named Peter and 2 females named Pamela and Sissy. These were dolphins that were used to spending time around people, having previously been housed for entertainment purposes at marine studios in Florida. They had even starred in the TV show Flipper. By the time the dolphinarium was set up and ready to commence research, Margaret Howe Lovatt had become experienced in volunteering with dolphins. She was assigned as the dolphins' main trainer, and she worked closely with John C. Lilly on the mission to help dolphins understand human language, a practice that John one day wanted to test on species from beyond this world. Now, this was the 1960s, and scientific research methods left a lot to be desired when compared to those that take place today. John insisted that in order to carry out the research to its full extent, it would be a good idea for Margaret to live with Peter, the male dolphin, in the dolphinarium. The duo from this point onwards spent all of their time together, where Margaret would make sounds that incorporated the vocalizations of both humans and dolphins, in order to encourage Peter to mimic her. According to Margaret, she almost got Peter to say the words "Hello, Margaret," but he struggled with the letter M. Things then took a turn for the worst. It's important to remember that Peter was a young dolphin and was therefore discovering both his body as well as certain urges that come with adolescence. Being an intelligent animal that has spent a lot of time around humans, his only option to release these urges was by treating Margaret as though she was a female dolphin. Margaret quickly noted how Peter's actions were delaying his learning process, and in a bizarre move, she eventually opted to relieve Peter of his urges manually. On this topic, Margaret would eventually say, "It wasn't sexual on my part, sensuous perhaps. It seems to me that it made the bond closer, not because of the sexual activity, but because of the lack of having to keep breaking. And that's really all it was. I was there to get to know Peter. That was part of Peter. It would just become part of what was going on, like an itch. Just get rid of that scratch and we would be done and move on." Things still proceeded to get darker. Later, John C. Lilly had been provided with the funds to research the effects of the drug LSD, research in which he cruelly used the dolphins as test subjects. When both his language and drug experiments proved unsuccessful, he lost the funding and the dolphins were moved to a different facility. Unfortunately, the conditions in the new dolphinarium were not up to standard. Peter in particular struggled with the lack of space and light in his new home, and tragically opted to take his own life. He simply sank to the bottom and refused to breathe, drowning as a result, something dolphins can voluntarily do. This is a truly horrific story, and one that should serve as a reminder for ethics in research going forward. However, that probably will not be the case, and we have no idea the amount of studies that are currently going on behind closed doors. A ghost hunter's worst nightmare. This footage comes from Andrew Pollard, known as the Yorkshire Ghost Guy, when he went to investigate Ewley Reservoir in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, UK. The reservoir was reported to be haunted by the ghost of an escaped asylum patient from the 1900s, who reportedly fell from a bridge and drowned in the reservoir. Andrew took to the reservoir alone, and at night, something most people wouldn't dare to do in the safest of places. Andrew attempted to call out the ghost whilst at the reservoir, but became frightened quickly by a strange sense he caught wind of, and ultimately fled. When Andrew arrived at his car, however, it would not start. Using a jump starter kit in his boot, he managed to eventually get it running, but became very scared in the process. I promise I'm not doing this for effect, but I tell you there is something different about tonight. My car isn't starting, he says in the video. I'm all on my own, it's pitch black, I really want to go home. Take a watch.
If the story is true, please come forward and tell people your story. Are you still here? Am I okay to be here? Am I okay to talk to you? Hello, could you come forward? My name's Andrew. What's your name? Am I in the right place? I simply wish to share your story. Did you jump from this bridge in the 1900s? Keep talking, I'm listening. That was catching that, I think.
Andrew adds that his car had never broken down before, and the majority of his fear came from the fact that he was alone at night. He does not believe that the ghost of the escaped patient had anything to do with the incident, but acknowledges that it was terrifying and quite amusing in hindsight. What do you make of the footage, and do you think the paranormal energy surrounding the site had anything to do with the car not starting? We have heard, and even experienced ourselves, batteries and machines drain or malfunction whilst in the presence of a supposedly haunted place. So that's it for this video. We hope you enjoyed and are loving the Creepy Marathon month. Don't forget to check back here tomorrow for your dose of daily scary paranormal content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again.